I drained my life savings to save my son's company, only to have him forge a general power of attorney while I was hospitalized to sell my home and throw me into a state-run facility. But he had no idea I had legally bound the property title years ago to a massive hidden lien held by an anonymous Wyoming LLC I controlled, which would lawfully swallow all the proceeds on closing day and leave him facing bankruptcy-level IRS tax collections. I stared through the rain-streaked window of the medical transport van at the Allied Van Line's truck idling on my driveway, realizing my son had sold the estate I built from scratch while I was sedated for a pacemaker replacement. My daughter-in-law, Sarah, stood on the porch, wearing my late wife's vintage Cartier watch, flashing a triumphant smirk as she directed the movers to haul away the antique mahogany dining table. I had liquidated my retirement pension to bail David's failing software startup out of bankruptcy and meticulously maintained every square inch of this $2.2 million property for 40 years, only to be traded for a one-way ticket to a state-run dementia ward. The sheriff's deputy standing by the curb checked the forged general power of attorney David had slipped into my hospital paperwork, formally declaring that every brick of my home now legally belonged to a cash buyer. But they forgot that buried deep in the county recorder's database, anchored to the foundational deed of this property, was a dormant $2.1 million first-position lien held by an anonymous Wyoming LLC that only I controlled. The engine of the Ford Transit van rumbled, vibrating against the cheap vinyl stretcher I was strapped to. I didn't scream. I didn't bang on the glass. 35 years as a senior title insurance underwriter for one of the largest underwriters in North America had burned the panic out of my system, replacing it with a cold procedural calculus. You don't fight a forged document with shouting. You fight it with superior paper. The betrayal had been executed with surgical precision. 2 weeks prior, I had suffered a mild arrhythmia. David, playing the role of the frantic, devoted son, had rushed to the ICU. Between the morphine drips and the beeping of the telemetry monitors, he had handed me a stack of what he claimed were standard hospital consent forms and Medicare waivers. I was groggy, my vision blurred by the heavy sedatives required for the pacemaker insertion. I trusted my blood. I signed where his index finger tapped the clipboard. It wasn't a Medicare waiver. It was a durable general power of attorney. Drafted by a strip mall lawyer, it contained a crucial, devastating clause: the power to alienate, sell, transfer, and convey real property. David had even brought a mobile notary, a nervous kid with a freshly minted stamp, commission number 884912, expiring in 2 years, to make the execution bulletproof. David didn't just steal my house, he legally became me. And his first act as me was to erase me. The transport van pulled away from the curb. I watched my 4,000-square-foot Tudor-style home shrink in the side mirror. The iron gates I had installed after my wife passed, the oak tree I had planted when David was born, it was all being boxed up and liquidated. The driver didn't speak. He just navigated the slick Seattle streets until we reached the industrial outskirts of the city, pulling up to a low-slung cinder-block building that looked more like a medium-security prison than a care facility. Oak Ridge Transitional Care. A Medicare-funded warehouse for the forgotten. The smell hit me before the automatic doors even fully parted. It was a suffocating cocktail of industrial ammonia, boiled cabbage, and the undeniable lingering scent of human decay. A disinterested intake nurse with a chipped name tag reading Brenda unbuckled my straps. "Welcome to Oak Ridge, Mr. Vance," she recited flatly, not making eye contact. "Your son signed the admission papers. Section 823 stipulates a mandatory surrender of all personal effects, including keys, wallets, and communication devices, for your safety." They wheeled me down a fluorescent-lit corridor with linoleum floors stained by decades of wheelchair tracks. My room was a 10-by-10 concrete box, 2 motorized beds. My roommate was a skeletal man staring blankly at a muted television playing daytime soap operas. A single barred window looked out over a dumpster in the alleyway. David had left a small plastic bin on the bedside table. Inside was a threadbare change of clothes, my toothbrush, and a first-generation iPad with a cracked screen. No phone, no wallet, no ID. He had effectively severed my connection to the outside world, ensuring I couldn't drive to a bank, hire a lawyer, or contest the power of attorney before the property sale was finalized. He thought he had me boxed in a corner, waiting for the clock to run out. He didn't realize I owned the clock. I picked up the cracked iPad and connected to the unsecured guest Wi-Fi network. The browser loaded slowly. I logged into a dormant Facebook account I kept under a pseudonym and navigated to the local marketplace. There it was, Sarah's profile. She was systematically dismantling 40 years of my life. My late wife's hand-carved cherrywood rocking chair, a piece I had commissioned in Vermont in 1985, was listed for $50. The description read, "Old furniture, must go today. Cash only." The sheer disrespect was a physical weight in my chest. I scrolled further. My vintage Macintosh tube amplifier, worth at least $5,000 to any audiophile, listed for $200. She was holding a garage sale for my legacy, turning my memories into pocket change to fund her manicures. But the rage in my chest didn't manifest as a spike on my new pacemaker. It compressed into something harder, diamond hard. Every $50 listing on her page was just adding another decimal point to the financial crater I was preparing to open beneath them. The next morning, at exactly 9 a.m., the landline on the nurse's station down the hall rang. A few minutes later, an orderly brought a cordless phone into my room. "It's your son." I took a breath, actively softening my posture, letting my shoulders slump. I needed my voice to sound thin, hollow, defeated. The voice of a broken old man who had accepted his exile. "Hello?" I rasped, allowing a slight tremor into my vocal cords. "Dad, it's David." His voice boomed through the receiver, dripping with the patronizing faux concern of a man who held all the cards. "How's the new place? The doctor said you need 24/7 monitoring. This was the only place Medicare would cover entirely. It's for your own good. You know that, right?" "David," I let my voice crack intentionally. "They took my keys. They won't let me leave this floor. Please, just bring me the photo albums from the den. The ones with your mother. You can keep the house, just let me have the albums." I heard a muffled scoff on the other end, followed by a whispered exchange with Sarah. "Look, Dad, things are moving really fast here," David said, his tone shifting to brisk annoyance. "We've already signed an exclusive listing agreement with Keller Williams. We had to do an estate clean-out. A junk removal service came this morning. The albums, they probably got tossed in the purge. I'll buy you a digital frame for Christmas, okay? I have to go. The real estate agent is calling on the other line." Click. He hung up. He threw away 30 years of photographs in a landfill because sorting them was too inconvenient for his timeline. I handed the phone back to the orderly. The moment the door clicked shut, the tremor in my hands vanished. My spine straightened. The charade of the broken old man was over. The game had officially begun. David assumed my entire net worth was locked in the equity of the house. He assumed that as my designated attorney in fact, he had unrestricted access to that equity. It was a fatal assumption born of financial illiteracy. During the nurse's evening rounds at 7:15 p.m., I waited until the squeak of her rubber-soled shoes faded down the hallway. I reached under the thin foam mattress of my hospital bed and pulled out a small rectangular object wrapped in a plastic Ziploc bag. It wasn't a weapon. It was a prepaid track phone dot. 2 years ago, when I first noticed the subtle signs of David's entitlement, the borrowed money that was never repaid, the casual inquiries about my will, the way Sarah eyed the property, I had hidden this burner phone in the hollowed-out lining of my leather shaving kit. The intake nurse, Brenda, hadn't bothered to check the false bottom. I powered on the device. The battery was at 82%. I punched in a 10-digit number with a 307 area code, Wyoming. The phone rang twice before a crisp, professional voice answered. "Northwest Registered Agent LLC. How can I direct your call?" "I need to reactivate a dormant entity. Speak with the compliance officer for account 849-Alpha-Tango, I said, keeping my voice low, authoritative, completely devoid of the tremor I had used with my son. "One moment, sir." A brief hold music played, followed by a man's voice. "Mr. Vance, it's been a few years. We show the annual franchise tax for Apex Holdings LLC is currently in arrears by $300. The entity is listed as inactive." "I am aware, Marcus," I replied. "I'm transmitting the $300 plus a $200 expedite fee via the prepaid Visa card on file ending in 4419. I need Apex Holdings LLC reinstated to active good standing with the Wyoming Secretary of State by close of business today." "Processing now," Marcus said. The clicking of a mechanical keyboard echoed over the line. "Payment cleared. Reinstatement filed electronically. Apex Holdings is active. Do you require any amendments to the operating agreement?" "No. The ownership remains 100% anonymous. I am the sole manager, but my name does not appear on the public registry. Maintain the veil." "Understood, sir. Is there anything else?" "Yes," I said, staring at the peeling paint on the cinderblock wall. "I need you to monitor the county recording database in King County, Washington. Parcel number 449210-0115. A title company is going to run a search on it very soon. When they pull the preliminary title report, they are going to find an anomaly. They will reach out to you as the registered agent. You will forward all documents to my secure fax line." "Noted, Mr. Vance. We are on standby." I ended the call and slipped the phone back under the mattress. Let me explain the trap David had just walked into. 5 years ago, anticipating that my son might one day try to forcibly liquidate my estate, I utilized a legal maneuver native to high net worth asset protection. I established Apex Holdings LLC in Wyoming, a state with the strictest corporate anonymity laws in the country. Nobody can look up who owns a Wyoming LLC. Then, acting as the manager of Apex Holdings, I drafted a promissory note. I legally borrowed $2.1 million from my own LLC. To secure this ghost loan, I executed a deed of trust, a first-position lien against my own house, and filed it quietly with the King County Recorder's Office. In the eyes of the law, my $2.2 million estate was encumbered by a $2.1 million mortgage held by a faceless corporation. The equity David thought he was stealing didn't exist. He wasn't selling a gold mine, he was selling a heavily mortgaged liability. And because the LLC was completely separate from my personal estate, the power of attorney he held was useless against it. 2 days later, the iPad pinged with a notification from Zillow. The house was officially on the market, listed at $2,200,000. The description made my stomach churn. A rare opportunity. Classic Tudor estate on prime acreage. Seller highly motivated. Perfect for investors or buyers looking for a quick close. David wasn't just selling it, he was dumping it. He had priced it slightly under market value to trigger a bidding war and guarantee a lightning-fast transaction. He wanted the cash in his account before I could potentially find a lawyer or before a judge could review the POA. It worked. Within 48 hours, the status on Zillow changed from active to pending. I used the burner phone to access public MLS data through a backdoor portal I still had login credentials for. David had accepted an all-cash offer for the full asking price of $2.2 million. The buyer was a Silicon Valley tech executive looking for a Seattle summer home. A 14-day escrow. No financing contingencies, no appraisal contingencies, a straight cash grab. I could almost visualize David and Sarah popping a bottle of Dom Perignon. They probably already had the Porsche dealership on speed dial. They were spending money they thought was already theirs. They were completely blind to the guillotine poised inches above their necks. Here is what happens when you sell a house. You don't just hand over the keys and get a check. The transaction must go through escrow, a neutral third party. And the escrow officer must order a title search to ensure the buyer is getting a clean title, free of any debts, judgments, or liens. David, having zero experience in commercial real estate law, probably signed the listing agreement without even glancing at the preliminary title report. He assumed that because I hadn't had a mortgage with Chase or Bank of America in 20 years, the house was free and clear. On day 5 of the escrow period, The title company's search engine hit the King County Recorder's database. It scanned past the original deed from 1982. It scanned past the minor remodel permits. And then, it hit a massive roadblock. Book 4192, page 88. Document number 202-109-1400234. Deed of trust. Grantor, Arthur Vance. Beneficiary, Apex Holdings, LLC. Original principal amount, $2,100,000.00. The title officer sitting in a cubicle downtown would have blinked at the screen. A $2.1 million lien on a $2.2 million sale. By law, this debt had to be paid off before the buyer could take possession. Normally, an escrow officer would immediately call the seller to ask about the massive lien. But David wasn't the seller. He was acting as the attorney-in-fact for the seller. And the escrow officer, dealing with a rigid timeline and a standard corporate lien, simply followed standard operating procedure. They drafted a payoff demand letter and mailed it to the registered agent of the beneficiary. They mailed it to Wyoming. My burner phone vibrated at 11 p.m. A secure email notification from Marcus at Northwest Registered Agent. Mr. Vance, we have received a formal request for beneficiary demand from Fidelity National Title in Seattle. They are requesting the exact payoff amount to clear the title on your property for an impending closing. I smiled in the darkness of the nursing home room. The trap had been sprung. Draft the response, I typed back on the miniature keypad. Calculate the original principal of $2.1 million, plus the accrued legal interest over 5 years at 4.5%. Add a $500 processing fee. The total payoff demand is $2,195,500. Provide them with the wire instructions for the Apex Holdings LLC corporate account at First Delaware Bank. Sign it, Authorized Managing Member. The title company didn't care who owned the LLC. They only cared that a legally binding payoff demand was received and that the math checked out. They would simply input that $2,195,500 figure into the master ledger for closing day. With the payoff demand securely in the escrow file, the title company moved forward, entirely bypassing David's awareness. In his mind, he was coasting toward a massive payday. His arrogance reached its zenith 48 hours before the closing date. The door to my concrete room swung open. Sarah stood in the doorway, dressed in a pristine white Chanel blazer, holding her nose slightly against the institutional smell. She carried a plastic clamshell of discounted supermarket chocolate chip cookies, the kind with the yellow clearance sticker still attached. "Hello, Arthur," she said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. She set the cookies on the bedside table, deliberately pushing aside my heart medication. "David is super busy with work, so I thought I'd come check on you. How's the ambiance?" I looked at her, my face a mask of neutral compliance. "It's fine, Sarah. The nurses are adequate." She sighed dramatically, brushing invisible dust off her sleeve. "Well, that's good. We just wanted to make sure you were settled. David and I have a lot going on. We're actually flying to Italy next week. Lake Como, first class on Emirates. It's a much-needed break from all this stress." She was taunting me. She was standing in the squalor they had forced me into, bragging about the luxury vacation funded by the theft of my life's work. "Italy is beautiful this time of year," I said softly, staring directly into her eyes. "Make sure you enjoy every single second of it." She smiled, a sharp, predatory expression. "Oh, we will. David handled the estate perfectly. The closing is on Thursday. You don't have to worry about a thing anymore, Arthur. You're completely taken care of." "Yes," I replied, my voice dropping an octave, losing the frail facade for just a fraction of a second. "I have taken care of everything." She frowned slightly, a brief flicker of confusion crossing her face, but her ego quickly suppressed it. She checked her Cartier watch, my wife's watch. "Right. Well, I have a massage appointment. Enjoy the cookies." She spun on her heel and walked out, her heels clicking aggressively down the linoleum hallway. I picked up the plastic container of clearance cookies and dropped it directly into the trash can. While she was admiring her reflection in the elevator mirrors, I was running the final calculations on the financial apocalypse that was about to hit her husband. Thursday, closing day. I was sitting in my hospital bed staring at the digital clock on the wall. 1:45 p.m. 20 miles away, in a glass-paneled conference room on the 40th floor of a downtown Seattle high-rise, David and Sarah were sitting across a massive mahogany table. I knew the exact layout of the Fidelity National Title Office. I had closed hundreds of deals there during my career. I could picture the scene with high-definition clarity. David would be wearing his custom-tailored suit, tapping his Mont Blanc pen against the leather desk pad, vibrating with greed. Sarah would be sitting next to him, legs crossed, already browsing real estate listings in Medina on her phone. Across from them would be the escrow officer. Let's call her Brenda. A veteran closer with zero tolerance for drama, possessing a meticulous eye for the final Alta settlement statement, the modernized version of the old HUD-1 form. This document is the Bible of real estate transactions. It dictates exactly where every single penny of the buyer's money goes. The buyer's $2.2 million cash wire had already hit the escrow trust account that morning. The funds were cleared. All that was left was for David, acting as my attorney-in-fact, to sign the closing documents and collect his loot. The digital clock in my room clicked to 2 p.m. The execution was underway. In the conference room, Brenda would slide a thick stack of paper across the mahogany table. All right, David. Since you are signing as the fiduciary under the power of attorney for Mr. Vance, I need your signature on the warranty deed, the excise tax affidavit, and finally, the ALTA master settlement statement. David would grab the pen eagerly. He wouldn't read the dense legal text. Amateurs never read the text when they think they've won. He would just flip to the signature pages, signing David Vance as attorney-in-fact for Arthur Vance, over and over again, legally binding himself to every term on those pages. Excellent, Brenda would say, organizing the signed pages. The deed is out for recording. Now let's review the final disbursements. She would hand him the single most important piece of paper in his life, the settlement statement. David's eyes would immediately dart to the bottom right corner. Line 603, cash to seller. The net proceeds. The number he had been dreaming about for weeks. He expected to see $2,068,000 after subtracting the 6% broker commissions. Instead, he saw 3 digits, $0.00. I could imagine the exact moment his brain short-circuited, the color draining from his face, the pen slipping from his fingers. Wait, David would say, his voice cracking, the arrogant veneer instantly shattering. There's a typo here. Line 603 says 0. Where is the $2 million? The buyer wired $2.2 million this morning. Brenda, completely unfazed, would tap her manicured fingernail on the middle of the page. Line 504. Payoff of first mortgage/lien. There's no typo, David, Brenda would explain in a tone reserved for explaining simple math to toddlers. As per standard title clearance procedures, all recorded liens must be satisfied before the seller receives any net proceeds. On line 504, you'll see a wire disbursement of $2,195,500. David would stare at the number, panic rising in his throat like bile. What lien? My father owned this house free and clear. He hasn't had a mortgage since 1998. Our title search indicates otherwise, Brenda would reply, sliding a copy of the deed of trust across the table. This is a first-position private promissory note recorded 5 years ago. It secures a loan against the property in favor of an entity called Apex Holdings LLC. We received a formal payoff demand from their registered agent in Wyoming. By law, the escrow trust must prioritize the lien holder. The $2,195,500 wire was initiated to their corporate account in Delaware 10 minutes ago. It is irreversible. Sarah would snatch the document, her eyes wide with terror. Apex Holdings? Who the hell is Apex Holdings? You gave our money to some shell company? It is not your money, ma'am, Brenda would correct coldly. It is the proceeds of the estate, which were legally encumbered by the property owner. The signature on the original promissory note from 5 years ago belongs to Arthur Vance. It was notarized. It is absolute. David would leap out of his chair, knocking his coffee onto the carpet. This is fraud. My father is senile. He's locked in a nursing home. I have the power of attorney. You stop that wire right now. Your power of attorney does not grant you the authority to void a legally recorded lien that predates your authorization by 5 years, Brenda would state, closing the file folder with finality. The title company's fiduciary duty is to clear the title for the buyer. We have done so. The transaction is complete. David would be hyperventilating now, the reality of the situation crushing his chest. Not only was the money gone, swallowed by a ghost entity he couldn't trace, but he had just finalized the sale of the only asset that could have covered his own massive debts. But the punishment wasn't over. I had built this trap with a secondary trigger, a kill switch designed to target his personal liability. There is one final matter, Brenda would say, handing David a single tax watermark document. Because you utilized a general power of attorney to execute this sale on behalf of the principal, and you signed the listing agreement as the authorizing party, federal regulations require us to issue the IRS Form 1099-S directly to the executing fiduciary. David stared at the form, his vision blurring. What is this? It is the proceeds from real estate transactions reporting form, Brenda explained, her voice entirely devoid of sympathy. We are mandated to report this $2.2 million gross sale to the Internal Revenue Service. And because you signed as the seller's agent, the 1099-S is generated under your Social Security number, David. But I didn't get any money, David screamed, his voice cracking into a high-pitched wail. The proceeds went to the LLC. The IRS does not care about the net cash you received, Brenda clarified surgically. They care about the capital gains on the gross sale price. You just executed the sale of an investment property that has appreciated by nearly $2 million since its original purchase. You will be personally liable for the capital gains tax on this transaction. At the current federal and state rates, you can expect a tax liability of roughly $400,000. Additionally, because the remaining funds after the lien payoff did not cover the entirety of the real estate agent commissions and the county excise taxes, you currently have an outstanding negative escrow balance of $24,500. We accept cashier's checks or wire transfers. David collapsed back into his leather chair, the air completely knocked out of his lungs. He hadn't just lost the $2 million. He had just personally triggered a $400,000 tax debt to the IRS, plus $24,500 in closing costs out of pocket for a house he didn't own, to get exactly $0 in return. He was bankrupt. He just hadn't filed the paperwork yet. At exactly 2:45 p.m., my burner phone rang. I wasn't in the nursing home anymore. I was sitting in the back of a black Lincoln Navigator, speeding down Interstate 5 toward SeaTac International Airport. 10 minutes prior, I had handed the intake nurse a legally binding discharge against medical advice form, walked out the front door, and stepped into the private car I had hired with the Apex LLC corporate card. I let the phone ring 4 times before hitting the green button. I didn't say a word. I just listened to the ragged, panicked breathing on the other end. "Dad?" David's voice was barely a whisper. It was the voice of a broken child who had just realized he had stepped on a landmine. "Dad, what did you do?" I watched the Seattle skyline roll past the tinted windows. "I did nothing, David. I was sitting in a dementia ward, exactly where you put me. You are the one who sold the house." "The escrow officer, the LLC, the lien," he stammered, his brain trying to process the magnitude of the financial slaughter. "Apex Holdings. That's you, isn't it? You set this up. You knew I would try to sell it." "A prudent title underwriter always secures his assets against fraudulent encumbrances," I said, my voice as cold and flat as a sheet of ice. "You assumed I was weak because my heart was failing. You assumed I was stupid because I let you hold the pen. But you forgot that I spent 35 years writing the rules you thought you were breaking. I owe the IRS $400,000, he screamed, the panic finally shattering his restraint. They're going to audit me. They're going to take my business. They're going to take my house. You ruined me. You executed a power of attorney to strip a father of his dignity and throw him into a warehouse to die, I replied, the absolute calm in my voice cutting through his hysteria like a scalpel. You sold the asset, David, but you forgot to check the liabilities. You signed the listing agreement. You signed the HUD-1. You signed your own financial death warrant. I merely provided the pen. Dad, please, he sobbed, the arrogance completely stripped away. You have to wire the money back. You have to cancel the note. I'm your son. No, David, I said softly. You are an authorized signatory who failed to do his due diligence, and the beneficiary does not issue refunds. I pressed the end call button. I popped the back cover off the track phone, pulled out the SIM card, snapped it in half, and dropped the pieces into the empty cup holder. 2 days later, I was sitting on the lanai of a beachfront condominium in Naples, Florida, watching the Gulf of Mexico turn a brilliant shade of orange in the sunset. A chilled glass of iced tea rested on the table next to a brand new iPad Pro. I opened my secure banking portal. The balance in the First Delaware bank account for Apex Holdings LLC read $2,195,500.00. I had already engaged a high-end estate planning attorney in Miami to draft an irrevocable trust. The funds were being transferred into a series of municipal bonds and blue-chip dividend stocks. The beneficiary of the trust was not my son. It was a local charity that provided legal aid for elderly victims of financial abuse. As for David, the fallout was swift and absolute. Through back-channel connections I still maintained in the title industry, I received updates on the implosion of his life. The $24,500 he owed the title company went to collections within 30 days. Because he couldn't pay it, his credit score plummeted. The bank that held the loan on his struggling software startup saw the credit dip and called in his commercial line of credit. But the real executioner was the IRS. When tax season arrived, the automated system cross-referenced his Social Security number with the 1099-S filed by Fidelity National Title. When he failed to pay the $400,000 in capital gains, the federal government initiated a levy against his personal bank accounts. They garnished his wages. They placed a tax lien on the modest townhouse he shared with Sarah. Sarah, realizing that the Lake Como vacations were over and that she was now married to a man who owed the federal government $500,000, filed for divorce 3 months later, taking half of whatever liquid cash they had left. David had tried to erase my existence for a quick payday. In the end, he erased his own. I took a sip of the iced tea, feeling the steady rhythmic beat of my new pacemaker. I was 72 years old, completely isolated from my bloodline, but I had never felt more alive. I didn't need to yell. I didn't need to throw a punch. I used the very system he tried to weaponize against me to systematically dismantle his future. I proved a fundamental truth of the world. True power doesn't come from aggression. It comes from knowing exactly where to put your signature and exactly when to let your enemy sign theirs. Some people tell me I was too ruthless to my own flesh and blood, that a father should forgive, no matter what. But when your own son looks you in the eye and tries to erase your existence for a quick payday, he stops being family and becomes a liability. I want to know where you stand. If your children threw you into a nursing home to steal your life's work, would you forgive them, or would you burn their world to the ground legally like I did? Let me know in the comments below. And drop your city and current time so I know where my story has reached today.